Hello, everyone. It's Rabbi Akiva Males, and today is Wednesday. It is the 24th of May, and we are getting ready for Shavuos. So today, instead of Parshas Naso, I'm going to share some details about Shavuos. Last week, we had a problem that initially nobody was able to hear me. Is everybody able to hear me? Everyone can hear me okay? If there's a problem hearing me, please send me a message, let me know, and we'll do everything we can to fix that. Okay, so let's begin. Okay, let's begin. All right. So today we're going to look at some sources that involve Shavuos. So today what we're going to talk about is, why do we wait so long to daven Maariv on Shavuos night? It almost seems to be a universal minhag that we, as opposed to, let's say, a regular Friday night in the summer where we start Shabbos early, and other Yom Tovim, if we wanted to, we could start Yom Tov early, as long as it's after Plag HaMincha. So why is it with Shavuos, we wait so long to daven Maariv on Shavuos night? So let's first take a look at what a contemporary halacha, not contemporary, it's really turn of the 20th century halacha source, which really codified much of contemporary halachic practice. Let's see what he writes. And this is the Mishnah Brura written by the Chafetz Chaim. So there you see a brief bio of the Chafetz Chaim. Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen passed away in 1933. So he's going on this section of the Shulchan Aruch. Let's see what the Shulchan Aruch clearly writes. It says, B'yom chamishim l'sfiras ha'omer. Once you hit day 50 of Sfiras, from when you began counting the Omer, hu Chag Shavuos, that's when the holiday of Shavuos begins, and that's what we celebrate. So it's easy to know if we started counting Omer on the second night of Pesach. So when you would hit 50, that's when you know you're at Shavuos. That's why we count till 49. There's 49 to the counting, and when it would be 50, that's when Shavuos begins. That's what the Shulchan Aruch tells us. Right beneath that is the Mishnah Brura by the Chafetz Chaim. He writes as follows. He says, B'yom chamishim l'sfiras Omer, that's what he's going on. He says, U'ma'acharim lispalel arvis. We delay davening Maariv, b'chnisa Shavuos, when the holiday of Shavuos begins, b'tzeis ha'kochavim. We wait until the stars come out. Kadesh yu yemei sfira, memtes yom temimos. Because we want the days that we counted for the Omer to be 49 complete days. So he tells us straight out that was the practice. That the practice, the optimal halachic practice would be that we're going to delay davening Maariv until Tzeis HaKochavim. So we have a situation, let's say, I'll tell you, for example, in Young Israel this year, I'm just pulling up on my phone what the Shavuos schedule looks like. The Shavuos schedule right here is that Mincha on Thursday will be at 7:44, and we're not davening Maariv until 8:52, because that's 50 minutes after the Shkia, after the sun sets. The sun sets at 8:02 on Thursday night, so we'll daven Maariv at 8:52. So that's a really long break, because we're davening Mincha at 7:44. So we'll be done with Mincha at 8 o'clock about, and then I'm scheduled to give a shir at the shul. It's called What Was Placed in the Aron and Where Is It Now? I'm not going to give it away. That's going to be at the shir. And that is going to go for close to 50 minutes. So I was very happy to prepare that, and I think everyone who's there is going to enjoy it. And if you're not going to be there the night of Shavuos, ask your husband to bring you home a source sheet or something, because I think you'll really enjoy the sources and what we're going to talk about. But be that as it may, we're not davening Maariv until Tzeis HaKochavim. Tzeis HaKochavim is like when Shabbos ends, that period of time after the Shkia, after sunset. So let's say a lot of places wait 42, we wait 50 based on Rav Moshe Feinstein. So 50 minutes after the Shkia, after the sunset, that's when we're first davening Maariv on Shavuos night. So we're not just making this up to make people's lives complicated. When you see our schedule, and you see the Chafetz Chaim writes this in the Mishnah Brura, the question is, what's the baseline? He says this very cryptic line. The reason we do this is so you have memtes yom temimos, that the 49 days of Shavuos were absolutely complete. What does that mean? That you got to have complete days? Look at the next source, is the Sha'ar HaTzion. The Sha'ar HaTzion is where the Chafetz Chaim, that's his footnotes. That's where he tells you, when he says his halacha in the Mishnah Brura, where it comes from, and he gives you a couple of sources. He says, first of all, you'll find this in the Taz. Taz is the Turei Zav, written by Rav David Alevi Siegel. That was his commentary to the Shulchan Aruch, written in the 1600s. Then you have the Pri Megadim, And we'll soon see a little bit more about that. That's another Achron, another later authority who's writing on the Shulchan Aruch. And he also says Shar Achronim, and there's other later authorities who say this as well. Okay, we're going to take an exploration to see some others, what they wrote about this, and then perhaps we'll have some questions and we'll see how the Chafetz Chaim arrived where he did. So we're going to take a look back to the Shalah. The Shalah was written by Rev Yeshayahu Halevi Horowitz. That's what you see here, the next source. Rav Isaiah ben Abraham Horowitz lived, you see, from 1555 to 1630. It's known as the Shalah HaKadosh. The Shalah is an acronym of his famous book, Shnei Luchos HaBris. And he was a very prominent rabbi, began in Germany, and he ended up in Israel. I believe he is buried in Tiberia. I believe it's Tiberia, not Tzfat. I believe it's Tiberia, right near the Rambam. So I remember when we were in Israel, was it this last time or a couple trips ago? I remember we were able to be at his grave to say some Tehillim there. So the Shalah was a very, very holy Jew, and he was very knowledgeable, and his sources are quoted. He a lot of his sources were Kabbalistic in nature, but they made their way into halacha, and you'll see that he is quoted very, very often. So let's take a look at what the Shalah tells us. He might be one of the earliest recorded sources that tell us about the minhag to start Shavuos very late and not make an early Yom Tov like we make early Shabbos. So let's see what he writes here. This is in his Shnei Luchos HaBris. He says, Chag HaShavuos hu asher tziva Hashem Yisparach lasos chag achar shiva Shavuos shel Sfira. God told us to make a holiday after 7 weeks of counting Sfiras HaOmer. The Kibalti Memori Agon Morei Rav Shmuel Milublin. Or is it Shlomo Milublin? I'm not sure. He says he received the following tradition from his Rabbi. Shekibal ish mi pei agon Rabbi Yaakov Falk. He says this goes far back, who much earlier Achron Rabbi Yaakov Falk. Shelo lasos kiddush v'lecho b'leil rishon shel chag Shavuos ad seisa kochavim. Don't recite kiddush and don't begin the holiday. Don't start eating your Yom Tov meal of Shavuos until seisa kochavim. Tom, what's the reason? When the Torah tells us about Sfiras Omer, it's written, Sheva Shabbosos Temimos Tiyana. It has to be 7 complete weeks. If that's the case, that we need 7 complete weeks, if I make Kiddush when it's still daytime, it's not Seisach Chavim yet, Mechaseroso, I've lopped off. I haven't had 49 complete days. 7 complete weeks means 49 complete days. Tamimos means complete. So it's almost like this Gezeres HaKosov. The Torah says Sheva Shabbosos Tamimos, got to be 7 complete weeks. Complete means, we don't say Mixas Hayom Kakulo, that a little bit of the day is like the full day went by. It means complete days. So if I got to have 49 complete days, that means I can't sanctify and begin the holiday of Shavuos until 49 days are up. That means I got to wait till Seisa Kochavim. So until the stars come out. When it's Vadai Laila, it's certainly the night. So he says, Ukshiesh Svira Eno Uvshiesh Svira Eno Shavuos. If there still is Sfiras HaOmer going on, you can't have Shavuos. It's got to wait till 49 complete days. Sheva Shabbos Tamilos have elapsed. And what happens when we make Kiddush? When I make Kiddush, that's when I'm saying I should bracha ban mikol am, or man mikol ashon, and I'm saying, and I'm thanking God for giving us this Yom Tov of Shavuos. That's when we're taking on ourselves the Yom Tov of Shavuos. That means if I do it early in the day, I'm taking some of the time away from what should have been 49 days of Sfira. So it'll come out that it's not 49 complete days, not 7 complete weeks. And don't ask me 1 second. But I davened Mariv earlier. That's not a big deal to daven Mariv earlier, because you could daven Mariv earlier, and that's what he says. He quotes a Gemara and Brachos, Rav Yishaya Tzali Shamatzei Shabbos b'Shabbos. He davened Matzei Shabbos Mariv when it was still Shabbos. In other words, you could daven Mariv earlier. That doesn't just like davening Mariv after Shabbos doesn't officially end Shabbos, doesn't end until I make Havdalah. So too, I could daven Mariv on Yom Tov earlier, and that's not a problem with Tamimos. I didn't cut short the 7 weeks, 49 days. The real problem is when I make Kiddush, when I make Hamotzi. That's what he ends up saying. So this is very interesting, but it also creates a problem. here's what's interesting, is that he's fully explaining that which the Mishnah Berurah casually quoted. Mishnah Berurah casually quoted this idea that I need to have Memphis Tamimos. I have to have 49 complete days. And if I were to make Shavuos early, it wouldn't be complete. That's what it's saying here. So he's giving us what's the source of this. Why don't we have anything? Why can't we do it early? This idea of Sheva Shabbosos Tamimos. This idea Tamimos that the Mishnah Berurah said. You see, the Shalah seems to be the first place where it's recorded, but he's saying it goes way back to a very famous Rabbi Yaakov Falk, who Rabbi Yaakov Falk says, no, that it's almost like a Gzeres HaKasov, that when it says Sheva Shabbosos Tamimos, they have to be complete. And the only way you can have completion is if I delay starting Shavuos until Tzeitzah Kochavim. Okay, but look what the Shalah said. So what do I delay till Tzeitzah Kochavim? Kiddush and Hamotzi, not davening Marav. The Shalah would have no problem davening Marav early. So if that's the case, why is young Israel, why is shuls around the world daven Marav? Why do we wait till Tzeitzah Kochavim for Marav? Why don't we daven Marav 15 minutes earlier and then go home? You'll have time to walk at home. You'll be home and we'll make Kiddush right at Seis. We can be 15 minutes out of schedule. Look what the Mishnah Berurah said again. Mishnah Berurah said, Ma'achron lispalel arvis. We wait to daven Marav until it's Seis. The Shalah said what the real issue is waiting to make Kiddush. So where did the Mishnah Berurah get this from? Where did the Chafetz Chaim get this from? That we want to wait until Tzeitzah Kochavim, until the stars come out to daven Marav. The Shalah is much earlier, 300 years earlier than the Mishnah Berurah. He's saying we want to wait till Tzeitzah to daven to make Kiddush. Why is the Mishnah Berurah pushing it back, giving an extra 15 minutes, let's say, that we don't even want to daven Marav until Tzeitzah? We could start our meals earlier. According to us, we're davening Marav at Seis. So let's say it's 10 minutes for Marav, and then 5 minutes till everyone says Good Yantav, leave shul, and then 10, 15 minutes to walk home. We're losing a half hour. Now you might just answer and say, what's the big deal? You're staying up so late Shavuos night anyhow. Who cares about a half hour? Well, that's not true for everyone. Not everyone's staying up a half hour. And you could have a family with young kids. They want to get the meal moving. And we're also just concerned about integrity and honesty. The Mishnah Berurah says we wait to daven Marav until Tzeis. The Shalah says the real issue is Kiddush. So what's going on? How do we understand this? Good question. Let's take a look a little further. On page 2, you will find the Magen Avram. The Magen Avram is one of our most famous Achronim commentators on the Shulchan Aruch. You'll see a brief bio of what he says, of who he was. His name was Rav Avram Gambiner, and again, you see he lived in the 1600s. So he's a little bit later than the Shalah. He was born after, like 20 years after. Oh, I'm sorry, he was born about 5 years. It says there, 5 years after the Shalah passed away. But he's just the next generation of Achronim. So he's just a little bit later. Let's see what the Magen Avram writes. And again, this is on that same section of the Shulchan Aruch that says that Shavuos is 50 days after we started counting the Omer. So he says, B'leil Shavuos ein mekadshin alakos ad Tzeitzah Kochavim. He says, like the Shalah, that what do? We wait until Tzeitzah Kochavim for what? Not like what the Mishnah Berurah wrote to daven Marev. We wait till Tzeitzah Kochavim for Kiddush. That's like the Shalah. Look what he says there. B'leil Shavuos ein mekadshin alakos. We don't make Kiddush ad Tzeitzah Kochavim. Until Tzeitzah Kochavim d'chsiv, because the Torah wrote Timimos ti, and it's supposed to be Timimos, supposed to be complete. So you see, he's in the Shalah world. The Shalah, Shnei Luchos Abres, or Yeshaya Horowitz, what did he say? That we wait till Tzeitzah for what? We wait for making Kiddush, not waiting to daven Marav. So where's the Mishnah Berurah? Where did the Chafetz Chaim get this from? That's amazing. Now let's take a look at one more source. The Taz. If you remembered, the Mishnah Berurah, when we saw the Shar Hatzion, I'm going back to page 1, when he told you his source for waiting to daven Marav until Tzeis, one of the sources he said was the Taz. In the Shar Hatzion Aleph, he says Taz, one of the sources for starting so late to daven Marav was the Taz. So let's see what the Taz actually writes. The Taz, now we see it. The Taz says, again, the Taz was Rav David Alevi Siegel, and he lived in the 1600s as well. Again, he was born while the Shalah was still alive, and he said Shalah passed away in 1630. The Taz didn't pass away; he lived a very long life. He didn't pass away until 1667. So the Taz was alive, and he saw the Shalah. Yet what does he write? We delay davening Marav when Shavuos begins, Kadesh Yimei Sfira Tamimos. So he just went beyond the Shalah. The Shalah and the Magen Avram, they said that we wait to make Kiddush until Tzeis HaKochavim. But now we finally see the Taz. We finally see the first early source says, no. We're not just waiting for Tzeis to say Kiddush. We're not even going to daven Mariv before Tzeis. And that's because we need to have Tamimos. We need to have that these are 7 complete weeks. The question is, what happened? What happened? Why the Taz, he didn't know what the Magen Avram wrote. He didn't know what the Shalah wrote. Where's the Taz coming from? Where's the Mishnah Berurah, Chavetz Chaim? Where are they coming from saying that we want to delay davening Mariv till Tzeis? Why can't we daven Mariv earlier and just don't make Kiddush until Tzeis? That's the question. Where's this coming from? So I saw a couple of years ago someone point to a fascinating source that has a theory, and it's a fascinating theory. Here's a brief bio on that source. This source was written by a Rav who was perished, who was murdered during the Holocaust. His name was Rabbi Shimon Sofer. Rabbi Shimon Sofer, he was the rabbi of a Hungarian city called Eger or Erlau, and he had a grandson, Rabbi Yochanan Sofer, who was known as the Erlau Rebbe in Israel. So these were from the family of the Chassam Sofer and the Kasav Sofer, so very, very famous rabbinic family. So this Rabbi Shimon Sofer was I believe a grandson of the Chassam Sofer. Yeah, because he was a great grandson. He was a grandson of the Kasav Sofer, which would have made him a great grandson of the Chassam Sofer. And he, as I said, he was murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust. He did write some Sfarim. He did write some stuff. It was printed in his lifetime. Others manuscripts that were printed after his death, when the state of Israel was established and yeshiva was set up in Israel. They wanted to print up some of his writings. So some was printed in his lifetime, some was printed after his death. We're going to see something that he wrote that has a fascinating theory. And again, he's bothered by this question. This is from his Shilos Tshuvas, his responsa that was called Hisorurus Tshuva. And what's fascinating, absolutely fascinating, is he's bothered by this problem. He wants to know, where did this come from? Where did the Taz come from that the Mishnah Berurah quotes? Where did this idea come from that not only do we want to wait until Tzeis HaKochavim, until the stars come out to make Kiddush, but we want to wait that long till we even daven Mariv? Where did that come from? Look at this theory. He has a fascinating theory. So let's look at it. So we're now at the top of page 3. He writes as follows, Lanias Daiti. So again, it was a much longer piece. This is just the punchline I wanted to get to, what his theory is to explain this. And he writes as follows, Lanias Daiti, it appears, according to the way I see things, that really, it's not just like what the Shalah and the Magen Avram originally wrote, that you could daven Mariv, but just don't make Kiddush until Tzeis. No, you shouldn't even daven Mariv until Tzeis. Why? Ki achshav, nowadays, noagu gam rabim mibale batim. There are many of the common folk, many of the members of all shuls, apshutim, who are not extremely learned. They're just, the everyday fellows who fill the pews in shul. Many of them, l'nayer kol halayla. Many of them stay up the whole Shavuos night. That wasn't always the case. It used to be that it was like the creme de la creme of the Jewish world of scholarship that stayed up Shavuos night. And then over time, it became more popular that the masses would stay up Shavuos night to learn also. Ukvar Yisorer Magen Avram Sham, and the Magen Avram, we're going to see that in a minute inside. He points out in Siman Tav Tzav Zalad, Shizara Lukros Kriya Shema, that if someone is going to stay up learning on Shavuos night, they should make sure they recite Kriya Shema Tchilas Halayla, Kivan Shein Koren Kriya Shema Alamita, that they really should recite Kriya Shema when it is certainly nighttime, because since they're not going to sleep on Shavuos night, they're staying up, they don't have the benefit of reciting Kriya Shema Shalmita. They're not saying Kriya Shema in bed. So if they wouldn't say Kriya Shema in the proper time. We all know that Kriya Shema is supposed to be recited in the morning, and it's also supposed to be recited at night. So he's telling men that if you're going to be up at night learning, just remember, you're not going to sleep to say Kriya Shema Al Mita, so you won't have that that reminder, you're not going to have that guarantee that you're going to say the 3 parshas of Kriya Shema at night before you go to sleep, because you're not going to sleep. So he puts in a reminder, puts in a plug to remind everyone that on Shavuos night, be certain to say Kriya Shema after it is already light, after it's night, after it's Kokhavim. So he says, Kivan Shen Karan Kriya Shema Lamita, of a Kriya Shema Shel Beis HaKnesses, if all they did was daven Mariv early, Lo Yatsu, Kirisa B'Simin Reish Lamed says, if all they did was daven Mariv early before it's Laila, that's nice. You can do that, but you have to repeat Kriya Shema. And many people, when do they remember to repeat Kriya Shema? Before they go to bed, because I'm going to say Shema anyhow, so I'll say all 3 paragraphs of Shema. But on Shavuos night, what happens? That many people, even the common folks, started staying up late at night. They're not going to say Kriya Shema before they go to bed. So you'll have this mass problem of a huge number of Klal Yisrael not saying Kriya Shema in the right time at night. So what do you do? Since most of the commoners do not know what the Magen Avraham wrote, this word of caution that if you're going to be up all night on Shavuos, make sure to say Shema again when it's Vadai Laila, when it's certainly night after Tzeis Kochavim. That's why he wants to suggest that the Taz wrote and the Mishnah Berurah wrote as well. Let's not daven Mariv ad Tzeis Kochavim until it's certainly night. Kadesh Yetzu b'Kriyas Shema. That way, everyone will fulfill Kriyas Shema. So fascinating. What they're writing is as follows: is that you're right at the time of the Shalah and earlier times in Jewish history, very few people stayed up the whole night of Shavuos. So the people who stayed up were scholarly, and they know, hey, I'm not going to say Kriya Shema because I'm not going to sleep tonight. So let me say Kriya Shema. I can make an early Mariv, and I'll say Kriya Shema at some point after Tzeis Kochavim, after the stars come out. When do we make Kiddush? Okay, we'll wait till after Tzeis Kochavim to make Kiddush. But when can we daven Mariv? Oh, you can daven Mariv earlier, no problem. Just you have to remember to say Kriya Shema. But what's the problem with Shavuos? At some point in Jewish history, the masses started staying up on Shavuos night. Once the masses started staying up on Shavuos night, so if we were davening Mariv early, people aren't going to say Kriya Shema in the right time, and they're not going to say it before they go to bed because they're not going to bed. So now you're going to have this mass occasion on a Yom Tov, which should be a celebration of Torah and mitzvahs, where you got a huge segment of Klal Yisrael is not going to be Yotzei the mitzvah of Kriya Shema. So to solve that, what did we do? Let's wait to daven Mariv until after Tzeis Kochavim. That's the suggestion of this Rav Shimon Sofer. Fascinating way to explain all this. And again, let's just look at one more source. Here it is in the Magen Avraham. Here's what the Magen Avraham is word of caution by the Hilchos Shavuos. He says as follows. He says, Ayin Siman Reish Lamed Hey. Look over there earlier. Tzarich likros Kriya Shema acher Tzeis Kochavim. That whenever you daven Mariv earlier than Tzeis Kochavim, earlier than the stars come out, it has to be repeated. Kivan Shem Korea Mitaso. And in Shavuos night especially, make sure to repeat it because you're not going to have the reminder of saying it before you go to sleep. Me, what do? Most nights of the year, we daven Mariv at Shul every night before Tzeis Kochavim. So what happens? Before I go to sleep at night, I say Kriya Shema Lamita, and I say the 3 parshas, I see the 3 paragraphs of Shema. So I'm covered. But on Shavuos night, I'm not going to bed. If I'm not going to bed, I'm not saying Kriya Shema Lamita. If I'm not saying Kriya Shema Lamita, if I didn't daven Mariv at Tzeis Kochavim, I got to remember to say Kriya Shema after Tzeis Kochavim. Some people might remember that. Maybe the scholars will remember that, but the masses won't. Therefore, Rav Shimon Sofer suggests that's how the minhag developed. That's why the Taz says, don't daven Mariv until after Tzeis. That's why the Chafetz Chaim, the Mishnah Berurah said, don't daven Mariv till after Tzeis. You're right, the Shalah only said, don't do Kiddush until after Tzeis. Yeah, that's true. And then what? You just got to remember to say Kriya Shema again. And if you weren't staying up all night Shavuos, you would remember because you're going to say Shema before you go to bed. But once everyone, even the masses, even the unlearned started staying up on Shavuos night, now there's this real fear. People aren't going to say Kriya Shema properly and be Yotzei, fulfill their obligation. Therefore, to make certain that we say Kriya Shema and we fulfill our obligation, that's why we wait till Tzeis Kochavim to daven Mariv. Absolutely fascinating insight. I just want to show you something fascinating. Two more fascinating sources. So one, I think years ago when I first saw this, it was in this sefer Sharshay Minhagei Ashkenaz that you see here. This was written by Rabbi I believe it's is it Rabbi Hamburger or Rabbi Bamberger? I can't. I think it's Rabbi Hamburger. He lives in Bnei Brak, obviously with a name like Hamburger. Oh, it says Hamburger. Okay, there it is, Rabbi Hamburger, right there. It says it on the page. Rabbi Hamburger his family originates from Germany, so he's very proud of Minhag Ashkenaz, and he started like an organization to promote and to revitalize classic Minhag Ashkenaz, because a lot of classic Minhag Ashkenaz have kind of fallen by the wayside. Outside of a shul like Breuer's, which does everything it can to preserve Minhag Ashkenaz, it's kind of fallen by the wayside in many circles. So he put together several volumes. They sold out so quickly. I don't think you could find them in farm stores anymore, that he did an incredible amount of research, and he wrote some fascinating essays into Minhag Ashkenaz. And I think this is where I originally saw many of these sources, was he wanted to track this down, because he was saying in original Minhag Ashkenaz, they didn't wait till Tzeis Kochavim to daven Marav. Yeah, they waited till Tzeis for Kiddush, but they didn't wait till Tzeis for davening Marav. So he started this hunt. Where did this come from? To wait until Tzeis to daven Marav, and I think that's where I saw he was the one who quoted this Rabbi Shimon Sofer, who connected the dots and put this together, which I thought was fascinating. But look at this caveat that he throws in towards the end of all this. He says, "Achen, it's worth pointing out al chumras hamtana lotzeis belel shvus." This is a chumra. It's definitely a stringency to wait until davening until tzeis kochavim, until we daven Marav on the night of Shavuos. He's patei b'tzar Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Arbach. A couple points. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, his students saw him almost grown, and he said as follows: "B'din timimos shal sfiras omer ma'od mikdaktakin." When it comes to timimos for Sfiras Omer, that we don't want to start early on Shavuos night. Oh, wow, are people makbid? Ooh, that's one time where the Torah said tmimos, that they're really makbid. The maros, despite the fact shezerak merumaz b'pasuk, it's only hinted to. It's not. The Gemara never speaks about this. It's the Mefarshim, until the Shalah, you really don't see it spoken about. There's a hint in there that you have to have Sheva Shabbos Tamimos, which means don't make early Yom. Okay, but wow, are people makbid on that? V'ilu, but there's another place in the Torah where it uses the expression of being Tamimos. It says, V'ilu tamim tiyeh Mashem Elokecha. The Torah clearly bids us. Moshe Rabbeinu told us, Tamim tiyeh Mashem Elokecha. We should all be wholesome in our service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We need to be Tmimos. We need to act and conduct ourselves as wholesome people. How do pasuk shalom? That's a beferish pasuk in the Torah. That's straight out the Torah telling us Hashem wants us to be tmimistic people, wants us to be wholesome. He says about that, which is a full pasuk. So he says upachos medakta kimbo. Very few people take that to heart. He says, wow, but this one about tmimos, Sheva Shabbos tmimos, woo, people are makbid on that. There's only a hint that, okay, you can't make an early Shavuos. But when the Torah tells us straight out that we're supposed to be wholesome people, we're supposed to be people who trust that Kadosh Baruch Hu, and we're not supposed to be chasing after witchcraft and all these other things, everything what it means to be a tamim, to be wholesome. How many people are so makbid on that? It's a beautiful point, what Rav Shlomo Zalman said. And he says he found someone else who also expressed this. And so Hashva, also Rabbi Yisachar Shlomo Teichtel, there was a great rabbi, he was also killed in the Holocaust. Rabbi Yisachar Shlomo Teichtel, he wrote his famous sefer, Mishnah Sacher. I believe he also was the one who wrote Ema Banim Simecha, about how important it was, the central role that Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, plays in the heart of Judaism. He didn't just groan, he said it almost like as a complaint on Klal Yisrael. He said, he tells, before you get all bent out of shape about Tmimos, that, I don't want anything to be missing, so I don't want to make Kiddush early, I don't want to daven early. He says, before you get that, there's something to work on first. Make sure that our entire lives, we're acting according to, we're conducting ourselves according to God's will. That's how to really fulfill Tamimos. Like what the Chazal tell us. So he seems to be saying, before you get so worked up about this, there's other work to do. Like Reb Chia says, Sheva Shabbos is Tamimos Tiyena, and Masai and Tamimos. When are those 7 weeks complete? When the Jewish people act in accordance with God's will, that's when we've really fulfilled Tamimos. So that's a very nice caveat. Just want to show you, though, in halacha, like the Mishnah Berurah wrote, that what's become accepted practice seems to be, I don't know if it's absolutely universal, but it definitely seems that way, is that we wait to daven Mariv until Tzeis Kochavim, not just Kiddush, but Mariv. And again, the way in Shorshe Minhagei Ashkenaz, he was the one who connected the dots, pointed us to Reb Shimon Sofer, was the one who explained it, that the reason why it moved beyond waiting for Kiddush for Tzeis, to even Mariv, we're not going to daven until Tzeis, had to do with the fact that once you had so many of the masses staying up Shavuos night, now there was this real fear that people aren't going to be Yotzei Kriyas Shema. So the way to make sure that people are going to be Yotzei Kriyas Shema, because they're not going to repeat it before going to sleep, is let's just delay Mariv. Therefore, people will say the Shema at the right time. So just want to show you this last source. This is the famous Ezra's Torah Luach. Many shuls in America, I don't know most, but our shul, many shuls throughout America, there's a Luach, there's like a Gabai's handbook that we use to remind ourselves of Minhagei Beis HaKnesses, and it's established based on the Piskei Halacha of Rabbi Yosef Eliyahu Henkin. He was one of the giants. He was a European Rav, was an absolute giant who came to America. He was here before Rav Moshe Feinstein, also living on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And once Rav Moshe came, Rav Moshe kind of became the person who was most prominent in terms of answering shilos for American Rabbanim. But prior to Rav Moshe, really was Rav Henkin. Rav Henkin and Rav Moshe had a very, very close relationship. But even after Rav Moshe was here and assumed that position, that leadership role, Rav Henkin continued to guide Jews all across America. And one of the things that he was most famous for was his luach, was his set of instructions for how a shul should be run. And it's continued to be printed. And the organization that he ran was called Ezra's Torah, which was a tzedakah organization that raised money to help Talmidei Chachamim. And it continues to be run by people who are loyal to Rav Henkin's mission. And yearly, as a fundraiser, they continue to produce his luach based on all of his piskei halacha. They just adapt it for the year, okay? Because every year is going to be a little different based on how the calendar works out this year. So based on the calendar, they apply all of Rav Henkin's piskei halacha and send out the luach. So there's both a Hebrew version and an English version. I've got here pages of the Hebrew version from this year. So here you see on page 4, here is the title page of Tafshin Pei Gimel. That's 5,783. That's the year we're in. And you see it says on the bottom there, it's Al Pi Piskei Hagon Rav Yosef Eliyahu Henkin. It's based on the rulings, halachic ruling of Rav Henkin. And then it says it's Ezra's Torah. They have a new address. They're no longer located on Lower East Side of Manhattan. They're up in Monsey area now. And let's take a look at Sivan. So here's Sivan. So Yom Hey, the 5th day of Sivan, which is also Thursday this year. So that's tomorrow. Hebo, Erev Shavuos. So tomorrow, Thursday's Erev Shavuos. Tefillah Kanog, Shachris is a normal Shachris. And then he has in parentheses, Ein Omrim Tachnon. We don't say Tachnon. We haven't been saying Tachnon since Sivan began, because first you had Rosh Chodesh, then you had Yom HaMiyuchas, and then you have the 3 days of preparation, Shloshas Yemei Hagbala. Now it says, you also don't say Kel Erech HaPayim. That's something that, I'm sorry, you say Kel Erech HaPayim. That's before the Torah is taken out. And then it says Kriyas HaTorah. We have Kriyas HaTorah, Ein Omrim Yehi Ratzon. We don't say the Yehi Ratzon. That's after the laning. That's something anytime there's no tachnon, we don't say those Yehi Ratzons. We do say Lam Natzech. And he says Rochtzen, we take a bath. V'tovlin, many people go to the mikvah. Many men go to the mikvah before Shavuos because it's one of Shalosh Regalim. Osin Kol HaChanos HaKavod Yom Tov. We do all the prep we need to do for Yom Tov. Then he has in bold Osin Erev Tavshilin. We prepare an Erev Tavshilin. Let's all remember, we're going to prepare an Erev Tavshilin this year, tomorrow, because since it's Friday Shabbos, we want to be able on Friday before Shabbos to make our food preparations, because we can't prepare on Shabbos. We can't cook and stuff on Shabbos. So we want to do an Erev Tavshilin tomorrow, and that'll enable us to make our preparations on Friday for Shabbos. Madlikan and Neros Bismanan. So the women light the candles in the proper time. So on Thursday night, they make 2 brachos, Ladlik Ner Shel Yom Tov, Shechianu, and then the last paragraph, Aleph to Shavuos. Now that we're at Shul, which is Yom Vav, that's the 6th of Sivan, and it says Vav Bo, and this year it lines up. It's also the 6th day of the week. It's Friday. Ma'achrin lispalel arvis. We delay davening Mariv ad la'achar tzeis hakochavim until after Tzeitzei Kochavim, like what the Mishnah Berurah wrote, that we're going to do, and the Taz, we're going to wait to daven Mariv until Tzeitzei Kochavim. And he says in parentheses, Shiyamei Sfira Tzrichem Lios Tamimim. Sfiras Omer has to be complete because it says Sheva Shabbos Tamimos. There we go. So it came full circle. We saw that the Mishnah Berurah wrote this. And now we see at the end, this is what Rav Henkin's advice was to shuls all over the country, around the world, was to wait to daven Mariv till then. We looked at the sources. We saw the Shalah said, yeah, we want to wait because of Sheva Shabbos Tamimos, but that meant Kiddush and Hamotzi, don't start the meal. Where did you see anything about Mariv? And then the Magen Avram also didn't mention Mariv. He said Kiddush and Hamotzi. The Taz says Mariv. Where'd that come from? So for that, we saw the Shorshe Minhagei Ashkenaz pointed us to Rav Shimon Sofer, who said it's based on a little-known Magen Avram. The Magen Avram was the one who told us that be very careful on Shavuos night. If you're staying up to learn, make sure that you say Kriya Shema after it's Lila, because you're not going to have what to fall back on. Kriya Shema Shalmita, saying it before we go to bed. So Rav Shimon Sofer says, now I could have put it all together. Beforehand, when it was just the scholars staying up, okay, they knew that Magen Avram, so they said Shema on the right time. But now that the masses are staying up, we don't want to set up a scenario where so many people are going to forget to say Shema on the right time. So what do? Delay davening Mariv until Tzeitzei Kochavim, and that'll ensure people say Shema on the right time. Absolutely fascinating. And that, my friends, that is what we're going to share today. I want to wish everyone a wonderful Yom Tov. I hope it's a beautiful Yom Tov. It's a good Yom Tov. It's a Yom Tov everyone enjoys together with friends, with family, with their shuls. And it should be Kabbalah Torah, that just like our ancestors accepted the Torah lovingly on themselves so many generations ago, we all go through that process again and bring our Kadosh Baruch Hu, we bring God and the Torah and our acceptance of the Torah into our lives again this year. I'm going to stop.